When the woman Edward was supporting caused a scene in front of me, I broke up with him. He looked cold and indifferent, as if he had everything under control. Suit yourself, you really think highly of yourself. But he didn't expect that I would move out of New York that same night. A year later, the big shot in the wealthy circle got married and sent an invitation to Edward. He watched in the audience as I, wearing a wedding dress, completely fell apart. Pushing open the door to the private room at White Manor, the room was indeed lively. 5 girls were sprawling all over, kneeling and sitting around Edward and his friends in the center. In the dimness, the beam of light fell on Edward's fair face. His golden glasses reflected the light, and I heard someone speak. Who's that college girl who's been clinging onto you lately? Aren't you afraid Irene will find out and get angry? The crisp clinking of glasses echoed. The person sounded noble yet cold, in this place full of desire and debauchery, but only a touch of redness could be seen. Just a kid, getting angry about this is really petty. But Selena, she's really pretty. The men's muted humming resounded. The lewd words rose in waves of delicate sounds, and I closed the door. I never meddled in Edward's private life. It used to be disdain, but now it's simply not my concern. He has had countless women before, but this Selena seems to be different. I gritted my teeth, wiping away the tears on my face. My coat slid off unconsciously, revealing the red marks on my neck. The rain had stopped. I returned home. This apartment was the home Edward had left for me. The furnishings in the house were all handpicked by him, according to my preferences during university. The maid looked at the cheongsam that had just arrived and greeted me. Miss Irene, you're back. Edward's anniversary gift for you has arrived. The cheongsam was intricately woven with gold thread, exquisitely crafted, representing endless luxury and wealth. I remembered the year I was snuggled in his arms, him playing with my soft hair. At that time, I was an ignorant young lady. The ring on my finger sparkled, and in a proud tone, I said, I want to wear a cheongsam for the engagement. I adore the charm of Chinese cheongsam. Influenced by the Hong Kong movies I had seen before, I had a special fondness for Chinese cheongsams. When it was time for the wedding, I wanted a grand ceremony, one of a kind in all of New York, or else he wouldn't be able to marry me. He smiled indulgently at that time. I reached out and touched the silk fabric of the red cheongsam. Perhaps he really wanted to get engaged. Maybe he had feelings for me too, I thought. My heart was tightly entwined. I bit my lip and put on the cheongsam. The maid stood by, bending down, advising me, Edward cares about you. Look at this cheongsam, it was custom made for a year. I easily slipped it on, and on the tall and slender figure in the mirror hung a red robe. This cheongsam was too big. The waist was loose, and the cheongsam was short. This was not meant for me. My nails were deeply embedded in my palms, tears hung on my cheekbones. I choked back a sob. The red marks on my lips oozed blood. Did he not come back to celebrate our anniversary? The maid looked hesitant, finally speaking after a long pause. He said, go to White Manor to find him. White Manor was a place of revelry and debauchery, with no shortage of beautiful women. I felt a laugh building up in me, but quickly suppressed it. By the time I changed my clothes and walked out of the dressing room, I looked calm. I had learned to be submissive and humble after my family fell out of favor. After standing in front of the private room door again a few hours later, the young girls who had been serving inside were gone. Edward's friends had brought their female companions. The scent of incense floated in the room with an elusive presence. I saw Edward's lips glistening with moisture. Sweat had soaked through his white shirt, his fingers tracing down the neck of the girl. Only after a long kiss did they stop. Someone whistled. Edward brought the grand adventure to White Manor. It's the first time he's kissed in public. Yes, even for Irene, he only did it after drinking. My steps halted at the door. The scene before me flashed back to the first time I met his friends after my family fell out of favor. That superficial grand adventure was just like this one. Choosing between kissing and drinking. I raised my face with anticipation, closed my eyes, waiting for the kiss to land. But Edward just smiled lightly, then downed 3 glasses of strong liquor and ended up in the hospital that night. I thought he was just saving face for me. But I didn't realize it was because I wasn't good enough. Before I could even step inside, that Selena shyly ran out. In her hand was a bag from my favorite brand, but one that I could no longer afford. Edward leaned against the sofa, looking interestedly at the girl who had just rushed to him. The two of them were entangled, competing in beauty. She wasn't any uglier than Selena, who had just left. I didn't even have the courage to confront her, and quickly rushed into the bathroom. but Selena smiled and grabbed my wrist. Irene, right? She took out a lipstick to touch up. The lipstick she used was just made by Edward. Selena smirked. I advise you to look out for yourself. Don't upset Edward. From top to bottom, she glanced over me. They say you are as beautiful as a goddess, but I see nothing special. Now you're just a mistress. Don't you know that being dignified is a sign of the legitimate wife? Selena shook her hand, sliding her arms behind. You should relax a bit. How can you hold on to a man like this? Guess how many times he wanted me last night? She looked at me as if she wanted to devour me, her face showing satisfaction. It's truly pitiful to be without a man's nourishment. I stood frozen in place, staring at the marks on her body that she intentionally showed me. I heard her ghostly voice echoing behind me. Do you think threatening him will work? If not, you can try. Want to bet? I turned around. She innocently shrugged. I came back 10 minutes late. You can try if you want. My gaze locked onto the red marks on her, biting my lip. I wasn't gambling with her. I was gambling on his final feelings. I hesitated twice, but finally pushed open the door to the private room. The strong smell of alcohol and smoke made me cough incessantly. Frowning, I walked over. Edward propped his chin on one hand, his collar undone, his collarbone covered in lip marks. The bitter sharp pain at the tip of my heart had turned into a dull ache, tears streaming down my face unconsciously. The friends around us looked at my expression with a hint of pity. Irene, don't cry. It breaks my heart to see you cry. If Edward isn't happy, I'll lend you a shoulder. How about that? You look really pretty. Even crying like this is beautiful. As their words turned more and more harsh, ringing in my ears, I stopped in front of Edward. He patted the spot next to him, gesturing the girls around him to clear off, and then waved me over. Sit here. As if he had me all figured out. Edward, let's break up. Edward didn't even lift an eyelid. I heard that he only glanced at me when they said I was crying. Suit yourself. You really think highly of yourself? I suddenly didn't want to reconcile anymore. The overwhelming urge to cry couldn't be suppressed any longer. I turned and walked out. When I bumped into Selena, who had just left, I heard her mocking laughter. That place was no longer my home. I had no luggage, nothing to hold on to. The coat on me was my last covering. The winter rain mixed with snowflakes, falling chillingly on me. The wind made me ache all over, biting my lip trying to button up the brass buttons in the cold wind. But even until my fingertips were swollen, I still couldn't fasten them. I squatted on the roadside, hugging my knees, the darkness closing in on me. Unable to hold back, I sat heavily on the bricks piled by the roadside, unable to suppress a loud sob. It was at that moment, a black umbrella was tilted over my head. Irene, the button won't close. It proves it's not suitable. Why not change it directly? Before I could speak, a heavy woolen coat fell on me. The wooden button easily closed, giving off a click. I looked up and met his eyes. Still cold? Does it matter if it's cold? I bit my lip, trying to keep my voice from trembling. The man chuckled lightly. This can't be the Irene I knowed. I knew this person. Gray. True to his name, handsome and refined, indescribably elegant. He had come from Las Vegas, someone nobody dared to cross. I had always wondered why he would mix with Edward and the others. Now I didn't care. Gray's family was also wealthy, showing just a hint would sustain me for several lifetimes. I heard that this gentleman had offended someone in Las Vegas due to his arrogance and had come to New York to hide for a while to save face. He handed me a small insulated cup, hot cocoa. Drink it to warm up. The rain mixed with snowflakes fell harder, the black umbrella steady over my head. It was so cold that emotion seemed to pour out in the cold wind. No longer pretending, I took the cup, unscrewing it. I heard his voice above my head, light as a feather. It's not time yet. Every syllable landed in my ears, exploding like fireworks. Irene, if you need money, I happen to be able to provide for you. Want me to be your ATM? Give it a chance? Gray's words were rapid, causing my expression to falter. Just as I raised my head again, he turned his gaze away too. Some fire rose within me, and I flung the just opened cup of hot cocoa. Most of the warm brown liquid splashed onto Gray. There were hot cocoa droplets hanging on his long lashes, not even blinking his eyes. Gray's stern brows and eyes took on a crystalline shine, with the dampened angles adding a dash of masculine appeal. Was he still willing to compromise under Edward's coercion? I reached up to unbutton the wooden buttons on my body. In the stalemate, I felt warmer. You give money, I'll go with you. Gray, do you think I'm out to sell myself? He lowered his head and gently brushed away my hand that was unbuttoning my coat. I'm sorry, Irene. Gray's lips curled up for the first time. I didn't tell you everything. I'm marrying you, I was taken aback. Gray and Edward were completely different types of people. Both of them had delicate and handsome features, but Gray exuded a wild and intense aura. He looked down at me, almost hypnotizing. Handsome, fierce, and yet mysteriously captivating, I was never one to be obedient. Growing up, everything desirable in the world was within my reach. I was spoiled, reckless, seemingly able to get anything I wanted. I had even captured Edward, a high-profile figure who was the object of affection for many elite women in New York. But that wasn't love. With my family's power dwindling, and remembering my mother's dying words, I had suppressed my temper and followed Edward. I thought he would give me a home out of past affection. But to my surprise, he kept me around just for appearances. Being submissive for too long, my rebellious nature burst forth unexpectedly on the snowy night. Couldn't I be bold anymore? No matter how much I misbehaved. The umbrella continued to shield me from the wind and rain. Gray's expression remained gentle, but with a hint of longing that couldn't be hidden. I didn't know where this feeling came from, but it ignited a spark within me in the icy world. Almost involuntarily, I raised my hand and wiped away a water stain from Gray's face. How much did you spend to marry me? A heavy gold card was placed in my palm. This is a gift. My assets are all in another villa. Go back and sign. While his tone remained indifferent, there was now a hint of seriousness. I raised my face and brushed Gray's palm. If you dare to marry me, what do I have to fear? Whether it was genuine feelings or just an act, I half pushed Gray into the room. Opening a bottle of imported liquor, worth more than a few houses, I gulped it down. The spicy sweetness slid down my throat, mingling with Gray's taste. His gentle kisses were fleeting, as if I were the most precious treasure in the world. My waist was gripped tightly. With a single move of his tall figure, he effortlessly held me in his hands. Like a devout follower kneeling before a deity, his fingertips traced delicately over my body. I flirtatiously glanced at him, his Adam's apple bobbed, showing signs of emotion. His cheeks were already flushed, and I knew my fair skin must have looked all the more alluring. The movement of his cheekbones indicated something stirring within him, and I had closed my eyes, anticipating the kiss that was about to land on my lips. Matters between a man and a woman need no further explanation. But crucially, he suddenly put some distance between us. With his arms propping me up, his eyes reddened with restraint, he fixed my collar, covered me with the blanket, stood upright, and was about to leave when I grabbed his wrist up before Gray could react. My slap landed forcefully on his fair neck. It was a powerful blow, and tears streamed uncontrollably down my face. How could I not stop crying? My mind was filled with memories of the past adventure when Edward chose to drink instead of kissing me, and now Gray seemed to do the same. Seeing me cry, Gray, who was always in control, became flustered. He gently wiped away my tears. We'll go get the certificate tomorrow, and then I'll come back to settle the score. I stiffened and rejected his hand. The words I wasted my youth on Edward for without getting in return echoed in my ears. Irene, I truly want to cherish you. Gray's eyes deepened as he traced my cheekbones and settled on my cheek. Just don't leave me this time. This time? Was there a previous time? I asked, the alcohol clouding my already unclear mind. The intensity and twists of emotions erased any recollection of my thoughts. His voice softened, evoking tenderness and allure, like feathers fluttering in my heart. Perhaps under the influence of alcohol, I grasped his neck and asked, if it's not a hidden ailment, why wait until tomorrow to prove it? You, a man who combines arrogance and elegance, had me intrigued. The alcohol had muddled my judgment, and as Gray's throat moved, he answered a call on his phone. I reached out to disconnect it, but was stopped. And a soft moan could be heard, unintentionally eavesdropping on the conversation. The light illuminated Gray's face as he wore a triumphant expression, and then the room fell into darkness. The person on the other end of the phone stood frozen in place, taking a moment to regain their senses. The voice was familiar yet unfamiliar. Soft and sweet, with a hint of rose-like boldness. Like the proud doll cat he had raised in his youth, who would only act sweet when it scented other cats on its owner. Irene, the proud doll. Edward knew that the sultry voice belonged to Irene, the lady he had shared a bed with for years, but had never crossed the final line. It must be her new game. After taking so much money over the years, she, just like her mother, must be trying to make him jealous. Edward looked at Selena sleeping by his side, her young and delicate face showing a hint of innocence. But she wasn't as beautiful as Irene. Recalling their conversation earlier that day, he felt he had been too harsh. Just this once, he thought, he would go and pacify her. After all, she was now almost entirely dependent on him after her family's downfall. Making such a scene, she must want him to provide her with a home, right? If she truly wanted to marry, it was indeed possible. He felt relieved at the thought. Opening his eyes again, the sun was already high in the sky. Gray was nowhere to be seen. My alcohol tolerance was low, but my memory was surprisingly clear. I remembered every wild moment clearly. I remembered how I had unbuttoned that shirt, removed that belt with my own hands. How that hand had roamed all over me, serving the chaos of desire. And how we entwined. As the daylight shone brightly, he continued, despite my vibrant cries and pleas. It was absurd and reckless. Everything that happened, I couldn't forget any of it. I rose, looking for my clothes to cover my body. The pathetic fabric was in pieces, almost impossible to reassemble. The wool coat on the floor was intact. With a click, I fastened the wooden button and hugged the coat as I headed out. But I bumped into a solid chest. Thinking of running away? Don't you want to take responsibility? Gray, now transformed from the arrogant man I once knew, had reddened eyes and a watery gaze, exuding a pitiful and pitiable aura. Just like a fallen highborn flower, who doesn't love to see a hero show a tender side. He lowered his head, tenderly touching my cheekbone, and gently stroked it. I told you we'd go get the certificate. It's already late, now you want to run. I raised my head to look at him, seeing a different version of myself in his eyes. Coquettish, unrestrained, beautiful and alluring, an exuberant pride I hadn't felt in years. In that brief moment of locking eyes, Gray's gaze deepened. His eyes were a dark purple, shimmering and mesmerizing. Following his gaze downwards, I noticed a vast expanse I had never paid attention to before. What is love? He asked as he lifted me up, and I saw his short, rugged hair, standing firm. His finger traced down, revealing a winding and clear river, emitting a sweet fragrance. The radiance of the countenance and the sturdy physique mingled defiantly and openly, dancing freely and boldly in the darkness. As the warm sunlight shone down, Gray looked down at the rose-like beauty lying there. She was a long-lost dream of youth, the true love he willingly surrendered to. Unable to resist his emotional aura, I reached out and wrapped my arms around his neck, seeking the place of unrestrained and supreme love. His voice was husky and charming. It wasn't until then that he spoke, "Seeing them makes me think of you." The next sentence unfolded mysteriously, "Seeing you makes me forget everything." Tears streamed down my face, allowing both clarity and subtlety to come forth. Let the rough and refined, majestic and flowing, all open up to him. No one else would speak such sincere words of love. His fingertips toyed with my hair as he whispered, "You are my final investment, Irene." His voice was soft and alluring as he wiped away my tears, eager for more. After countless entanglements, I finally fell into a deep sleep. When I woke up again and opened my eyes, the void had dissipated. I saw Gray, and I saw the world. The man in front of me was handsome and elegant, still a bit drowsy but filled with excitement and anticipation. When he saw me awaken, Gray quickly got up and carefully opened the entire wardrobe wall. Inside were countless custom-made clothing and accessories, but the largest section was filled with various traditional Chinese dresses and kipeos. He knew that I liked it. As I took a tentative step, the warm and soft carpets securely enveloped me. In his encouraging gaze, I took step by step until I stood in front of him. In the mirror, the man was half kneeling in front of me. He chose the most exquisite red qipao for me to change into. I recognized this qipao. The female lead in that Hong Kong movie wore this qipao, which was extremely rare and sought after the film. With golden silk buttons, his fingertips danced, skillfully fastening it for me. The qipao fabric was heavy-duty, giving it weight on me. My eyes welled up as I looked at Gray, who was already meticulously groomed, and softly spoke, "Do we need to find a makeup artist?" "This doesn't suit you." His fingertips brushed over my brows and eyes. "I'll do it." Unexpectedly, his hands were surprisingly skillful. The colors were harmonious, exuding elegance and grace. We were dressed in matching couple outfits, looking very sleek and beautiful. Gray tightly held my hand, fastened my seatbelt before getting into the car himself. As the car swayed, I woke up again, only to realize that the car had been driving for quite a while. That this was not the marriage registration office. Pushing open the car door, I found myself in front of an ancient church. The Gothic-style church from my dreams. He held my hand and led me into the temple. I was speechless. He let go of my hand, warming it as if it were a treasure. Before we stood under the domed ceiling of the church, with devout eyes, he knelt in front of me, the ring in his hand gleaming. I made a vow to God, but it's Irene who can make it come true. Tears welled up in my eyes. Will you marry me? Letting him put the ring on for me, I sniffled and asked him, we've agreed to get married, so why all this trouble? Gray, beaming with pride, stopped humming and proudly replied, marrying Irene is a big deal, so of course, the ceremony cannot be lacking. I can't let Irene suffer even a bit. I held back my tears. Smiling as we finished taking registration photos and left with the documents, Gray still grinning foolishly. A pang of sourness tugged at my heart. Gray, why are you so good to me? He chuckled without a word. I'm waiting for someone to see their own heart clearly. Peter's fiancée is named Lily, a wedding planner and costume designer. During dinner that day, someone asked what the top designer had been busy with. Lily suddenly smiled gently and softly said, Gray had a wedding dress custom made by the most famous old craftsman in New York. The wedding date was approaching, so he borrowed a few people from me to rush the work. I helped with some of the wedding details. Hearing Gray's name, Edward unconsciously felt uneasy. She mumbled to herself, saying the size seemed a lot like Irene's. It had been so long since Irene had come in for clothes fitting. Edward's unfounded guilt was quickly suppressed. He hadn't given her much money for a long time. A girl with nothing, did she need wealth and luxury to be lifted up? He had her firmly by his side with the orphanage issue, and naturally, she wouldn't speak up. Even her bag was from a few years ago. Not to mention anything expensive. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Selena's handbag next to her and remembered. This brand seemed to be one Irene liked. It seemed he had indeed treated her unfairly. Why was she always acting like a proud, spoiled rich girl? He decided he must make it right this time and cherish Irene and live well with her. Edward, truly, couldn't be without Irene. The day she left White Manor, I called her. But it seemed Irene's number was no longer in use. Lily's voice was soft, but each word hit Edward hard. Being in love and continuously betrayed can be exhausting. Edward glanced disdainfully at Peter, who was surrounded by women on both sides, a feeling of disgust rising in his throat. Peter's face turned cold, squeezing the girl on his left shoulder even harder. It was unclear whether these words were meant for Edward to hear or for his fiancé Peter. Edward threw his drink onto the balcony and went out to smoke a cigarette. Edward had been unable to find Irene for the past 3 months. He remembered the night before when he went to have a proposal cheapo custom made by Lily for Irene. He had caught a glimpse of Gray from afar. Gray didn't say anything, but when he spotted Edward, he gave a meaningful smile that made his heart race. Edward's eyes widened suddenly. The last time he called Irene, besides some murmurs, all that was left was a stifled groan. After the legal marriage, Gray took me to meet many people. This secluded seaside villa, far from the hustle and bustle, was quiet and peaceful. An elderly woman with a half-gray head had a gentle demeanor, yet carried some childlike innocence. She joyfully touched my face. Irene, you're so beautiful. A clearly brisk sister stepped out and took the elderly woman from my hands. Irene, take this. A delicate wooden box was placed in my hand. I should have visited you a long time ago, but I had to take care of my mother. Gray took off his jacket to pump water at the well. The resistance and tension in my heart gradually subsided. They were all such good people. A gentle and tender mother, an assertive and efficient sister. There weren't too many servants here, with the majority of chores being done by the sister herself. I was fully accepted. The sister smiled and patted my hair. If Gray bullies you, come find me. She said she would support me. My heart thumped wildly. The woman in front of me seemed familiar and made me feel unexpectedly close. When the sister went to cook, the elderly woman smiled at me, took off the jade bangle from her wrist, and put it on me, saying, Irene. I couldn't understand why they looked at me with not just fondness, but also some indescribable emotions. I temporarily attributed it to Gray speaking well of me. When I saw drool at the corner of her mouth, I instinctively reached out to wipe it for her. The sister, who was coming from afar, saw it. She froze for a moment, then smiled and said, Irene is a good girl, always has been. The sister told me that the mother had Alzheimer's disease. But in conversations, she still treated me as Irene. She even held my hand and cried when she got excited. That jerk Gray, how did he bring back my Irene? I tried hard to remember but still couldn't recall the past. By then, Gray had fetched the water and handed me a wet handkerchief to dry my hands. I suddenly asked, Gray, have I met my mom before? Gray bent down, gently kissed my forehead, but changed the subject. With the family treasure on my hand, I couldn't run away this time. In just a few months, Gray had given me all the affection. This was the love I had wasted an entire youth on with Edward and never got in return. Why? He knew I was asking him the reason for keeping silent. But Gray smiled openly and candidly, I can't tell you yet. This is a promise I made to Irene. Something in my heart was stirred in an instant. And then it beat even more vigorously. His voice was like celestial music. She had said she had to remember on her own. Reluctantly holding a cigarette, Peter drove for him. Edward, do you have to find her? Edward pursed his lips. I want to give the best to Irene. Thinking of Lily's calm and dignified demeanor, Peter felt inexplicably annoyed. Her studio was not large. When the car stopped, a cigarette had burned out. Peter said, his last puff of smoke, you go in by yourself, I won't. Edward looked at Peter's impatient expression and thought of his past. It seemed to be the same. Hesitating for a moment, he opened his mouth. Peter, Irene is a good person. Don't do something you'll regret. Peter raised an eyebrow, non-committal. He sighed and quickly entered the studio. Lily, measuring fabric sizes with her head down, looked up only when Edward walked in with a smile. What's the matter, Edward? Selena ordered several clothes. I haven't finished them yet. Edward was stunned. It seemed that even Selena could come in for cheapo fittings, but he hadn't given Irene the qualification to come in. She had always loved kipeos. What had he done? I want to order a cheapo for Irene. The best-looking one, for our engagement. He forced a smile. She loves rituals. So I'll start from the proposal. Lily watched Edward, who seemed oddly fixated, and didn't say a word. After a while, she finally spoke. Irene hasn't come to see me for a long time. This size is from when she was in college. I last saw her at White Manor. She's lost too much weight. Edward's mind flashed with the memory of Irene's tall and slender figure the last time he saw her. You haven't seen her in a long time, right? Her words were light but urgent. Leave her alone. Although it was meant as a well-intentioned remark, Edward suddenly lost control. She would never leave. She's Irene. She loves me the most. How could she not want me? Lily scoffed, ruthless in shattering his illusion. She's too good for you. Edward's eyes reddened in an instant, and he uncontrollably lunged at Lily. Lily saw Peter watching from afar. Her fiancé didn't step in to help. As she neared suffocation, she couldn't help but speak the truth for Irene. She's leaving because of you. Tears streamed down Lily's face. Crying for Irene, crying for herself. After a while, just as her vision was about to blur, she suddenly regained oxygen. She gasped for air, seeing the once arrogant man shed tears. Edward cried. He grabbed Lily. Help me, I want to see her. I will bring the ring and go propose to her, give her a home. Lily smirked. She knew, of course, the ring Irene had was sent by another man. Gray deserves it. Waking up was not easy. I stretched lazily and saw my radiant face in the mirror, couldn't help but pat my face. Too decadent, can't continue like this. After becoming husband and wife. Gray openly demanded more, almost driving me crazy. I angrily kicked the satisfied Gray, who was working on the side, but he just chuckled. Looking at his distinct features, my heart skipped a beat. It felt like I had known you for a long time. Gray looked at me expectantly. But I still couldn't remember. He hugged me. I'm not in a hurry. As our breaths intertwined, I saw him open his thick pile of documents. I am not a hidden woman. Gray. His voice faded husky, magnetic. So, do you have a plan in mind? I held his hand. I want to try studying abroad, further my education. Gray curved his lips, looking at me. I have given up too much. I want to reclaim my own pride. I can't have Gray bringing work home all the time to accompany me. I kicked him out. Reluctantly, he brushed his nose against mine. You made me sleep alone on our wedding night. I remembered last night when he had ignored my pleas and coldly said, don't even think about entering our bedroom if you skip work again tonight. Gray sneakily kissed me and then left promptly. My study room was next to the bedroom, all arranged by Gray himself. The books for study were also gathered by him, with many irreplaceable notes inside. It seemed like his handwriting. Next to the study was a maid's forbidden area. Gray was not hiding anything from me, he valued it greatly, and I was not someone who sought to pry, never entered. While studying, I noticed a strong smell of smoke downstairs. A fire had ignited, dangerously close to the upstairs, where I was. As the flames spread, I suddenly remembered how Gray treasured this room. Without hesitation, I rushed into that room to try and salvage as much of his precious belongings as possible. When I pushed the door open, I froze in place. The fire gradually subsided, the temperature dropped. But in that room, there were only portraits of me. From wearing a princess dress, to a school uniform, to adulthood, and finally a weary-looking Irene. All sizes of Irene. Under the portrait of my adulthood, there lay an exquisite pearl necklace. Memories suddenly flooded back. My head buzzed. By this time, the fire had been completely extinguished, everything was safe. None of the portraits in this room were damaged. I remembered everything. My 18th birthday celebration was unforgettable. But I never thought I had forgotten him. Gray was fighting for power at that time. He was injured and sought refuge in my house. I had my first drink at the birthday banquet, and he coincidentally hid in my room. I had just taken off my heavy dress when I saw Gray, covered in a discarded suit jacket, covered in blood. Perhaps the allure of the moment, bolstered by alcohol, I saw him like that and felt no fear. I drank at my coming-of-age ceremony. Gray was drugged. Everything happened as if it were predestined. Suddenly, I understood why Gray and I were so compatible. It turns out it was fated from that year. The proud young lady was perched on the boy like a victorious general. The bloodstains on him added a touch of recklessness to the young lover's entanglement. Gray's voice was sexy yet weak as he gently pressed on his wound, watching the drunken girl in front of him swaying and speaking, "Don't forget about me, wait for me to marry you when I return." The drunk girl was playful yet stubborn, tilting her neck to reveal the marks he left on her. "Have I forgotten you so you no longer have any responsibility?" He helplessly replied, "Forget about me, and then I'll tell you, you are supposed to be my wife." She was so spoiled that she was uncontrollable. "Don't force me, you need to wait for me to remember on my own." Her soft lips descended. Gray was aroused, his eyes wolfish, leaning down again. The girl's voice was tender, "No, don't. It was a night of no control. The next day, I saw the blood-stained suit on the floor. After asking around, I found out it belonged to Edward. I mistook it for Edward. As a result, after my coming-of-age ceremony, my family suddenly lost power overnight. Losing my parents, I chose to selectively forget the last moments of joy and indulgence. For some reason, I stayed by Edward's side. It turned out my enduring patience was because I mistook him for someone else. It seemed like I suddenly understood why Edward had never touched me. Despite kissing and getting emotional, he always stopped short of taking the final step. When he came to me that year, it was because he saw the red mark on my neck and thought I was frivolous and had mingled with other people. A misunderstanding arose. Crying, I hugged the anxiously looking Gray tightly. "I'm sorry, I actually forgot about you." The teasing from that day turned out to be a prophecy. Gray tightened his arms. It felt like he was embracing the entire world. Now that I remembered everything, I no longer resisted the wedding. Instead, I began to enthusiastically plan with Gray. But Gray, on the other hand, kept demanding benefits from me every day, one after another. He said it was for our customs, and we needed to live separately for a month to have a lasting relationship. Naturally, he didn't mention that he couldn't bear to part with the delicate and tender girl. I looked at his puppy-like wet eyes and eventually couldn't harden my heart. Every corner of the villa bore traces of me. Until I begged him, gasping for air, did he pause, giving me time to rest. But I didn't realize the door was left slightly ajar, unsure of what was truly closed. Edward had finally located Irene's whereabouts after much effort, but seeing the door open pained his eyes. He didn't even dare to ask inside. The soft voice he heard was meant for someone else. Edward's eyes reddened. His steps wanted to leave countless times, but he couldn't. He couldn't plot against her. Edward crouched outside the villa's door all night, listening to her shallow breathing, imagining her flourishing with someone else. He bit his lip fiercely, regretting countless times why he hadn't touched her. Why? Why had he gradually pushed the person he loved most to another? The door creaked. Gray heard it, also witnessed Edward's distraught figure. But it wasn't enough. He demanded in every possible way, teasing the cherry lips to make a more pleasing sound. It still wasn't enough. Edward had bullied Gray's sweetheart for too long. He needed to confront his feelings. Edward pondered countless ways of a reunion. But he didn't expect it to be at the wedding. Holding the gold-embossed invitation, written in Irene's own handwriting. Beside her, there was a majestic and dignified font. Gray's. Clearly written on it was Irene's name alongside another man's name. It was Gray who personally sent the invitation, which Edward, reluctant to face, couldn't refuse the family's request. If someone personally invites you and insists on your punctuality, why dawdle here? Gray's power and influence extended to his family business empire. There was naturally no way to refuse. His father's gaze lingered on the name Irene for a long time, not speaking kindly. If you do anything out of line, I won't forgive you. A few days before the wedding, he fell ill again. It had always been Irene taking care of him, but this time, Selena went to Hawaii with her friends and didn't come back for days. He ended up in the hospital alone, initially planning to use this as an excuse to skip the wedding. But he still went. It had been too long since he had seen Irene. Even if it was the last brave act for her, he couldn't bear to give up, not even a chance for redemption. Edward thought he wanted to reconnect with Irene. In a delicate wooden box lay the wedding ring and the heavy-duty cheongsam he had specifically tailored for Lily. This was his gift. Even if Gray got angry, he wanted to bring Irene back home. Looking at the cheongsam, he couldn't help but cover his eyes. Remembering Lily's mocking laughter, if you really want it, I happen to have Irene's size here. It was sent by Gray. In the end, he had to get the measurements for his woman from another man's hands. Full of hope for a reunion, he flew to Las Vegas. But as he entered, the wedding was already in progress. I do. Without hesitation, with happiness and joy. Edward stood frozen in place, watching the couple on the stage. Now, Irene smiled, her eyes sparkling with excitement as she placed her hand in Gray's palm. It was as if he saw her for the first time. She was smiling back then, dignified and measured. Edward, come and chase me. Dressed in the most gorgeous wedding gown, having the grandest wedding, just like the request she made to him back then, but the groom ended up being someone else. He covered his heart. Irene had already deeply embedded into his bone marrow, inseparable. Unfortunately, Edward had not known how to cherish her before. It felt like something was missing. He wept, dropping tears, kneeling amidst the crowd's gasps. But no one paid him any attention. Her steadfastness, indulgence, and genuine love, along with her looks of hope as she gazed towards someone else, all dissipated in the air. After the ceremony, Gray raised his glass, then went to the side room to change into a new outfit. When he came out, he was still smiling, but his expression suddenly turned cold when he saw himself in the mirror. With a trembling voice, he said, I want to marry you. He looked at Irene, her face filled with happiness and smiles, but he couldn't bring himself to say those two words. In the future, you can still come find me, I will provide you with a home, she said softly. But there's no future for us. Gray stood in front of her, his face icy. Irene, upon seeing him, quickly grabbed Gray's arm shyly and said, Let's go, my mother is waiting to toast. She didn't even spare a glance at him. Exhausted, he stumbled out, unable to speak, tears welling up. Being with Gray, I felt like I had become much luckier. After a year and a half of preparing, I successfully got accepted into Columbia University for further studies. This time, I moved away from New York completely and went to Las Vegas. Lily, who designed my wedding dress, came to see me, and I thanked her repeatedly. Unfortunately, I didn't inherit my mother's talent, but Lily had a natural gift. She smiled gently and handed me a notebook, saying, These are drawings made by children from the orphanage. They know you're newlywed, so this is a wedding gift for you. My eyes welled up. She still remembered. It was the orphanage my mother set up for charity years ago, after our family went bankrupt and struggled to keep it running. Edward only contributed a little, so when I left New York, I handed over all my savings to her. I asked Lily to take care of it for me, and she held onto it so dearly. Seeing her looking tired, I couldn't help but feel sorry for her. "Lily, why don't you come out more often?" I suggested. I had heard from Edward that she spoke up for me at various gatherings. I remembered that friendship. Watching her looking worn out, I couldn't help but think of Peter's carefree life. She simply smiled and said, "Irene, the design program at Columbia University is also very famous. I want to apply too." I knew she had moved on. Some friendships can't be let go of immediately, but time will reveal everything. I smiled and pointed at my belly, saying, "Then let's be classmates." A year later, she congratulated me joyfully, saying, "No, I want to personally tailor clothes for your child." I hugged her, feeling a brief stiffness and the fabric of her soaked shoulder. "Everything will pass. Tomorrow will bring spring."